Hello, thank you for tuning in to Longshot Wargaming. Today we're going to play a 15mm wargame using the Battlegroup rule set. We're going to conduct an assault river crossing in the Rhineland region of southern Germany. By 1945, the Second World War was entering its fifth year. By now, Germany was on her back foot. All of the territorial gains won in the early campaigns of the war had been forfeited to the Allies. Germany was in strategic retreat to the fatherland. After the failure of the 1944 winter offensive in the Ardennes region, the German army found itself battered, undermanned, and poorly equipped. The Red Army was positioned to enter Berlin from the east, and the Western Allies were staged to breach Hitler's West Wall. The noose was beginning to tighten. The German army did, however, have one natural advantage: rivers. The German countryside was dominated by a vast network of rivers and tributaries. All of them posed tactical problems for the advancing armies. Vehicles and men needed to be moved across to these rivers to continue the drive forward. The Germans knew this and made it a priority to control or destroy as many bridges as possible. This would force the Allies into the incredibly vulnerable position of having to conduct an assault river crossing using expedient bridges. The Allies did just that. In places where the existing bridges were destroyed, the Allies would build them. When it became necessary to push armor and vehicles across, the go-to choice was the pontoon bridge. Combat engineers built hundreds of expedient bridges throughout the war, most notably across the Ruhr, Rhine, and Danube rivers. However, the more numerous and less famous crossings happened over the smaller tributaries that dominated the region. In these cases, infantry and engineers were tasked with establishing a bridgehead using assault boats. The bridge would then be assembled as quickly as possible, usually under fire. The daring actions of the U.S. Army combat engineers are no doubtedly one of the key factors in the success of the Rhineland campaign. Let's take a look at the opposing forces. Tom will be playing as the Americans. His force will center around 3 armored infantry platoons, with 1 Sherman tank platoon in support and engineer and reconnaissance attachments. Scott will be playing as the Germans. His force will consist of 2 Volksgrenadier platoons, and in support he will have a Tiger tank, a platoon of Panzer IV tanks, and a battery of 80mm mortars. At the start of the game, the Germans will be occupying the urban area on the right side of the table. Scott has chosen to upgrade several key buildings to reinforced cover. This will increase German survivability in the defense. The American force will make its way onto the left side of the table over the course of 3 turns. The German objective is to deny an American river crossing at all costs, even if this means destroying the existing bridge. Scott will attempt to inflict high enough casualties to break the American force and cause a retreat. The American objective is to cross and move. Objective 1 will be to capture the bridge and move as many American forces across as possible. If for some reason Tom cannot capture the bridge, his objective will become to conduct an expedient crossing elsewhere. As house rules dictate, the defending player goes first. Scott makes few moves but places key units in ambush. Scott's Volksgrenadiers are dug in and occupying hardened positions on the river banks. With MG-42s, they will surely be menacing for anyone attempting to cross the river. Scott's armor is kept in reserve. Once the Americans commit to a crossing, they can be called forward to strengthen the defense. The infamous Tiger tank, with its 88mm gun, stands ready to harvest any Sherman brave enough to attempt a crossing. Tom begins moving his forces into the battle area. Hell-bent on capturing an intact bridge, he immediately rushes an armored infantry platoon forward. The M3 half-tracks move quickly over road and make it to the near side of the bridge. On the American left, 3 Shermans enter the battle area. Their General Motors twin inline diesel engines roar as they smash through the wheat field. A dismounted infantry platoon follows. "The war is almost over. Don't do anything stupid," their sergeant exclaims as they advance cautiously. The American infantry at the bridge spot a roadblock placed on the far side of the river. The squads dismount and begin to dash across the bridge. The Germans spot this attempt and answer with 80mm mortar fire. This causes several casualties and pins a half-track. The infantry push on. The bridge must be captured. The sound of the soldiers' boot soles could be heard clanking as they ran across the steel bridge. Their hearts raced as they closed the distance. The bridge was gone. A shockwave rips across the battle area. In an instant, the American rifle squad is lost. Before the dust settled from the explosion, the Germans again drop 80mm mortars into the already bloodied Americans. Tom now has to determine the best location to conduct a river crossing. Like a great fortress, the reinforced buildings stand proud on the German side of the river.
Heavy Cav 6, this is checkmate 1-6, over.
Tom attempts to call a fire mission from regimental artillery but fails his comm check. Without artillery, this will certainly be a costly affair. The Americans begin staging for a crossing on the right side of their advance. The 3rd Infantry Platoon is moved forward in medium trucks. On the banks of the river, the men begin to load into assault boats. The first 2 squads set off across the river. The men paddle as fast as they can, as this is a very vulnerable position. An MG-42 screams to life. 2 men are hit. Now that the location of the American crossing is clear, Scott begins to move his forces. His armor is brought forward, and infantry is moved into better position. An American bridging unit is pushed forward in preparation. Tom continues the waterborne assault as 2 more infantry squads take to the boats. Scott answers again with MG-42 and mortar fire. The casualties continue to mount. Without artillery support, Tom is in desperate need of some concealment before the bridge can be erected. A Sherman 105mm howitzer is called to the riverbank. 2 smoke shells are expended and the German side of the river is blanketed with a smoke screen. Finally, some relief for the crossing infantrymen. By now, 3 squads have reached the far side and are preparing to assault the abandoned factory. Tom knows his smokescreen is temporary and seizes the opportunity to begin bridge construction. By this point in the game, Scott's armor has made it to the riverbank. Now German and American tanks trade blows from across the river. A Sherman tank is hit and its turret is thrown into the air. Thanks to favorable weather conditions, the smoke screen remains in place for the next few turns. With some concealment, the second bridge section is put in place. Everywhere else, bullets whiz from opposite sides of the river. Both sides make an offering of lead. With an incredible volume of fire from each MG-42, the casualties add up quickly for the American force. With the improvement of the German defensive positions, it is very difficult for the Americans to inflict any significant damage to the tenacious defenders. One daring infantry squad stalks through the thick smoke and is able to ambush an unsuspecting panzer. The 3-inch rocket from the bazooka shrieks violently just before smashing into the side of the Iron Beast. The Germans defending the factory now begin to collapse to a secondary defensive line. 2 American squads prepare for a close assault. The wind has now dissipated the smoke screen, however, construction continues. The third and final bridge section is in place, however, the bridgehead is still vulnerable. The American force has taken significant casualties and is now struggling with manpower. An engineer section is the first to cross the bridge. Their task will be to breach the barbed wire laced on the enemy shore. This task will have to be done under punishing machine gun fire. In an effort to solidify the bridgehead, Tom pushes all of his remaining armor across the bridge. The tanks make it to the enemy shore. The decisive moments of the battle lay just ahead. The German force is dug in and has taken few casualties. The Americans are vulnerable and bloodied. Just as the Shermans cross onto the shore, the Tiger crests over the bridge embankment. Like the cat that shares its name, it is a predator. Shots ring out. The Tiger and the Shermans exchange blows. The lead Sherman is engulfed in flame. The Sherman 105 desperately lobs an HE shell at the Tiger, hoping for some effect, but there is none. It too met a fiery end. The infantry left on the German side move into the now empty factory. Seeing that his isolated forces face annihilation, Tom attempts to reinforce them by pushing a half-track across the river. As it advanced, its heavy machine gun wailed. After an ear-shattering explosion, it would be counted among the Tiger's prey. At this point, the American force was lost. It no longer had the combat power to secure the bridgehead. Today, the Germans successfully thwarted a crossing. However, history would show enough successful crossings were made that the war would be over before the summer. As always, thank you for watching Longshot Wargaming. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming battle reports.